או.
לא, אני מנסה להקליט לענן. תכף תראו את זה. יש לנו בעיות פה עם הגשם ועם הרוחות.
Yeah, the weather is quite crazy now. Geshe now with us.
Okay.
We have a storm here, so lots of rain and lots of very strong winds.
Oh, okay. Yeah, well.
Maybe connection not so good with some.
But absolutely marvelous.
Yeah, I can imagine. It's good to have the rain. Okay, great. Let's start. Dali, can you show the prayer? Does that work? I mean, the picture of the Buddha.
I think she has frozen.
Ah, she's frozen. Okay. Let me see whether I'm already. No, not yet. Okay. Okay, well, then I'll recite the prayers. Never mind. And hopefully she'll be back so I can use the. Okay. Anyway, let's start with the meditation, focusing on the breath. And then in order to be inspired and to be prepared to take refuge, visualize the embodiment of all enlightened qualities in the space in front of you in the form of Buddha Shakyamuni. With the same nature as your Lama or your Lamas. Seated on a large open lotus, a sun disk and a moon disk. Wearing the saffron-colored monk robes of a fully ordained monk. His right hand in the earth-touching gesture and his left hand resting in his lap in the meditation gesture, holding a begging bowl. With Buddha's mind being absorbed in emptiness while realizing all other phenomena and experiencing infinite compassion. Compassion for all sentient beings who are surrounding us. Quietly seated, wherever there's space. All of them appearing in the form of human beings. especially the ones we don't like, who annoy us, who give us a hard time, seated right in front of us. And then remember, all of us are the same and wanting to be happy and not wanting to suffer. It's that which drives us, which motivates all of our actions, whether constructive or harmful. And we all have the potential to attain the enlightened mind of a Buddha. So aware of that, let's generate affectionate love, a sincere affection and care for those right in front of us, but also all other sentient beings. A sense of closeness and acceptance of all the temporary faults that we all have. And then focus in particular on the endless suffering sentient beings experience all the time. And generate great compassion as focused on all sentient beings. Not leaving out a single one of them. And wishes for all of them to be free from suffering and its causes. And wishes, may I be able to lead sentient beings to a state free from suffering. And then allow for that wish to become stronger, to give way to determination in the form of the altruistic attitude. Determined to do whatever is necessary and however long it takes to lead sentient beings to a state free from suffering and its causes. Feel that altruistic attitude, your entire being. and then generate the mind of enlightenment, the wish to become fully enlightened Buddha first, in order to be able to benefit all sentient beings. Try to really aspire towards that. Try to be determined to reach that state from the depth of your heart. As the most meaningful goal. I think that it's also the aspiration to become enlightened for the welfare of all sentient beings that will continue to study Nagarjuna's text. Let's first take refuge and generate bodhicitta once again through the prayer. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the accumulation of merits of practicing generosity and so forth, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the accumulation of merits of practicing generosity and so forth, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the accumulation of merits of practicing generosity and so forth, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. Okay. Dalit, can you make me a co-host? Okay. There we go. So first, Lamrim. Okay, so we're still meditating on refuge. Last time I spoke about the reasons for taking refuge, or at the causes for taking refuge. So, well, actually, the way it's described in the Lamrim talks about, or it's mentioned here as well in the outlines, well, dread, or dreading or being cautious about rebirth in the unfortunate realm. I mean, the unfortunate, or taking an unfortunate rebirth. But that is actually just one reason. In fact, I guess you could say there are four. Dreading to suffer in this life, to dread suffering in this life, to dread suffering in a future life, to dread samsaric suffering in general, and to dread the suffering of all sentient beings. So there are actually four types of taking refuge in that sense. Taking refuge for the benefit of this life, taking refuge for the benefit of the next life, taking refuge for the benefit of attaining self-liberation, liberating ourselves from cyclic existence, and taking refuge for the benefit of all sentient beings. And so as we progress in our practice, well, the reason for taking refuge will change. Now, some of you may be surprised if I say taking refuge for the benefit of this life, because that's usually not mentioned. But we take refuge out of, well, for the reason of suffering in this life, dreading, fearing, dreading, suffering in this life. And so in that sense, therefore, it's important to take refuge exactly with that motivation, because if we suffer too much, I mean, for instance, if we take refuge and we start to practice the Dharma, but the Dharma makes us feel miserable, we can't practice. So happiness and well-being is extremely important. I mean, in every situation, it's not just about being attached to happiness and so forth. Even without attachment, a being who's free from attachment, who's attained liberation, will still have a virtuous thought to be free from suffering. It's just a natural tendency of the mind, and everyone has the right to be happy. In fact, whatever we do, if we feel satisfied, if we feel well, everything goes better. Everything works better. Whatever we do, we can do it much more effectively. And so Tao Seti, he mentioned it in one of his comments, saying it's so important to have joy. Yes, to have joy while practicing the Dharma. That doesn't mean we don't have to undergo hardships. Of course, there are hardships involved. If I want to just watch a movie and I don't know, eat a buffet and what have you, and instead pull myself together and meditate, well, there's some hardship involved. However, that doesn't mean I'm going to sit there for hours just suffering because I'm meditating. No, then you can't meditate. If that's the state of mind, well, we won't do it again. So therefore, happiness in this life is extremely important, but it's not stressed much in the texts. So I think I've spoken about it before, but just to mention it again, please don't misunderstand that Dharma, that Buddhism is not concerned with the well-being of this life. But why is the next life, why is it stressed so much more? Well, the reason is that happiness in a future life necessitates virtuous actions. Happiness in this life does not necessitate virtuous actions. Well, don't get me wrong. I need to be more specific about this. When we talk about, for instance, having financial security, having everything we need on a material basis, food, drink, a house, a roof over our head, and so forth. Well, in order to attain that, to receive those material objects, we need to engage in generosity. So if I want to achieve this in my next life, the only way to get that in a future life is to practice generosity. However, in this life, talking about this life, if, let's say, I've accumulated the karma to be affluent, to have a certain amount of possessions and so forth, if I work hard for it. So there's different types of karma. It doesn't just mean you have the karma to be, I mean, to have the karma to be affluent. There are different types. There's the type that you're naturally affluent, in that you don't have to do anything. You're born in a rich family, or you, I don't know, fill out a lottery ticket and you, I don't know, win the jackpot and so forth. That is one type of karmic result of being, well, financially secure, in fact, being wealthy. But then there's also the type of having to work hard. Now, working hard is the cooperative condition, is the condition, it's not the karmic cause of it. It's just a cooperative condition. And if working hard means you're an honest and virtuous person and so forth, well, since you've accumulated that karma, working hard for this wealth, you'll eventually reach that. But it's not specific that it has to be a virtuous action. Even with the non-virtuous action, if you make an effort to rob this bank, if you make an effort to, I don't know, rob this person of all their savings and so forth, of course, rob some person of all their savings, you may become rich in this lifetime. So therefore, becoming rich in this lifetime does not necessitate virtuous action. But I'm not talking about the karmic cause. It still necessitates necessitates a karmic cause of generosity being accumulated in a past life, or maybe even in this life. But there are other causes and conditions that lead to the ripening of that karma, and they could also be non-virtuous, which is actually a problem. This is why we end up having a sense good things happen to bad people and bad things happen to good people, in the sense that a person who we consider to be really virtuous, well, due to even positive actions, a negative karma may ripen. Because those factors that lead to the ripening of a karma, they don't have to be virtuous or non-virtuous or whatever. It's just the coming together of many different causes and conditions, and all of them can lead to the ripening of a virtuous or non-virtuous karma without having to be virtuous or non-virtuous, etc. Which is why, like I said, you can have the karma to be extremely rich, but that karma is triggered through, well, virtuous, non-virtuous actions. But that does not happen in a next life. In a next life, I mean, if you want to accumulate the causes for wealth in the next life, don't rob a bank. Just don't rob a bank. Don't deceive others. Don't steal their money. It's not going to result. Anyway, it's not going to be a cooperative condition for the ripening of the karma, because that can only be created in the next life. Okay, so therefore, that's, I believe, one very important reason why in the Lamrim, for instance, it talks about taking refuge because of dreading the suffering in a future life. That is one reason, I guess, because, well, if we dread the suffering in the future life, we have to accumulate virtuous actions to avoid these actions, because the only way we create a cause is by way of a karmic cause. It can only be a karmic cause. While in this life, as I just said, it could also be a cooperative condition, our action, and it doesn't necessitate for a virtuous karma to ripen. Also, negative actions can lead to that, which seems unfair, but it's just the way cause and effect works. Okay, but another reason, I guess, would also be we naturally look after the happiness of this life. I mean, we're really not concerned with future suffering as much, well, as we are with, of course, the most immediate suffering. Immediate in the sense, the more in the presence it is, the stronger our sense to avoid it. But even, that's why we pay into pension funds and so forth. Even future sufferings in this life, we're concerned with those. Okay. But anyway, going back to taking refuge, there are these different types. But the Lamrim, since it's at the beginning of the Lamrim that refuge is mentioned at the very beginning. Why? Because it is the gateway to Buddhist practice. It is that which turns our mind. So taking refuge, of course, our mind taking refuge. I'm not talking about reciting the refuge prayer, but our mind turning itself to Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. That's the gateway to Buddhist practice. And since we start off with the motivation, the easiest motivation, if you like, well, dreading the suffering of this life, but even more important, dreading the suffering of future lives. Therefore, that's the main motivation. But later on, of course, that dread, it changes. It changes eventually to the dread, to the refuge of a bodhisattva who doesn't dread his or her own suffering, but the suffering of all sentient beings. There are different types. I mean, how wonderful if we can take refuge, not just dreading our own suffering, not just being afraid to suffer ourselves, but even more so being really concerned with the suffering of other sentient beings. All right, so that's one aspect of refuge. And if we can take refuge, over this coming week as part of our practice, adopting the third version, or the fourth motivation, or the fourth cause, I should say, the fourth cause of dread, which is the dread of the suffering of sentient beings, well, great. Okay, and then of course there's the conviction, hopefully it's there, the conviction in the ability of the Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, and the triple gem, as they're called, to protect us from that particular suffering. So what are the objects of refuge? Okay, well, in general, we talk about the Buddha. There are different ways to think of the Buddha, the ultimate Buddha in the sense of the mental qualities of a Buddha, the nature of his mind or his or her mind. So actually qualities that we cannot directly perceive. And then there's the conventional Buddha, which is the Rupakaya as it's called. So the body of a Buddha, the Buddha, the body that we can perceive. Okay, as sentient beings, as non-Buddhas. And then with the Dharma, again, you have the ultimate Dharma, the qualities of an Arya being, of someone who has realized emptiness directly. So their path, the path consciousnesses in their continuum, as well as those afflictions, those obstructions that they have eliminated, the true cessations. But the conventional Dharma is the 84,000 different teachings, the teachings of the Buddha. That's how we usually look at it. And then the ultimate Sangha, this I don't know whether that's correct. It's the Arya beings themselves. It's not the knowledge and liberation, the true path and true cessation, but it's rather the Aryas, the Arya beings, those who realize emptiness themselves. And the conventional, well, it refers to, well, the assembly of monks and nuns, but also the community, the Dharma community, our Dharma friends, in a wider sense, in a more conventional sense. Therefore, that's what it refers to. Anyway, but not only do we go and take refuge in those three Buddha, Dharma, Sangha outside of ourselves, but there's also a way in which we take refuge in our personal future Buddha, future Dharma, and future Sangha. So here, future Buddha, of course, becoming a Buddha, future Dharma in the sense of our own true cessations, our own true path consciousnesses, and Sangha, well, of ourselves becoming a being who's realized emptiness directly. So taking refuge here in that sense is not turning towards them and trying to find solutions to the kind of suffering we dread, but rather aspiring towards that state. And again, caused by, for instance, if we choose the highest motivation or the highest cause, dreading the suffering of all sentient beings, well, then we turn towards Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, we turn towards our own Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, our future enlightenment, in order to remove that kind of suffering of sentient beings. Okay, so having explained all that, then I guess it's at this, I've said a lot already. Oh, it's okay. A few more words. So to focus on now the qualities, to get a sense of who the Buddha is. Start off with the Buddha, although the main refuge is the Dharma. Well, we start with the Buddha. And to think the Buddha is an embodiment of that which is possible, of the Dharma. And I think what may be helpful when we focus on the Buddha, we should think if we have a Lama who we have a close connection to, or someone we may not have that close connection yet, but if there's anyone who we consider to be close to a Buddha, well, that Lama, that person we should focus on. So let's take His Holiness the Dalai Lama, or Lama Zopa Rinpoche, or anyone else, to get a sense they are examples of someone who embodies the Dharma. But not just that this person, if we can see this person as the closest to a Buddha possible, or even as a Buddha, if we can actually consider that person to be a Buddha, then to think, first of all, their incredible compassion, that this person cares for me, has more love and compassion for me than anyone else who's not enlightened. Okay, any other being. I mean, of course, all the other Buddhas equally have love and compassion, but if that person is an enlightened Buddha, they care for me more than anyone else. So to become aware of that incredible love and compassion, how amazing. to have that love and compassion. But not just that. Okay, I'm not really using the right. Okay, so not the right. Here's the third quality, but I'm just going through them as I remember them. But secondly, also that their mind is totally free from any obscurations. They've actualized their fullest potential. Their mind is totally free from any wrong view, any misapprehension. And so in that way, this is something we can reach ourselves. So they're an example for us of what is possible. And because of all their practice, of everything they've done, for us, they become this incredibly powerful object of accumulating virtue. So powerful in the sense of just seeing a Buddha, because of the potential that they've accumulated, the prayers, the aspiration of prayers that they recited or that they made when they were not a Buddha. It's just seeing a Buddha, we accumulate virtue, just thinking about them. So how kind that they become such an object of refuge. But to think in another way, even leaving away merit and all that, that's hard to fathom. But states of mind such as faith and devotion. I mean, for the Buddha himself or herself, faith and devotion are not important. They don't have an ego-driven mind that wants to be worshipped and so forth. No, but for us, these states of mind are so helpful. They're so helpful because they calm our mind. They inspire our mind to go beyond our ordinary state right now and to work towards actualizing our fullest potential. So these minds on the psychological level are so helpful. And who triggers them within us in our continuum? The Buddha. So to think of these qualities, and there's so many more, and you've got a lot mentioned. There was rather worded slightly differently in a different Lamrim text, but just to consider those, how fortunate we are to have these incredible beings so that they teach the Dharma anyway. I mean, don't even need to mention that, guiding us towards enlightenment. But that's not all. That's not all. So there's so much more to them, being such an inspiration and so forth. So anyway, that's what I would like you to do for this coming week, to reflect on the fact, whichever kind of refuge you choose as to the cause. Like I said, the 4 types. In the text, only 3 are mentioned, but I would like to add the 4th of also dreading the suffering of this life. But anyway, whichever you choose, or choose all 4, one after the other, well then focus also on the Buddha in that way, if you have the time and the interest. Okay. Great. So that's it for, it's a little more than usual, but never mind. So, okay. And next, I'd like to address something that Varda asked about. Varda asked me a question. So I want to go back to this, and it's just her question is really important. How she gets there, that's a different matter. But her question is basically, when I mentioned these terms here, apprehendable object and apprehended object. So especially here for the apprehendable object, what is used is the future tense of the word to apprehend. So her question is, well, since apprehendable object and appearing object are the same, is this saying that because the future tense is used, the appearing object lies in the future, and that which we apprehend is right now? Isn't it the other way around? She asked. Don't things appear first and then they're apprehended? Okay, that was her question. I hope I summarized it correctly. Yeah. So first of all, Varda, that's just the grammar that they use a future tense. Think of verbs in the English language that modify a noun. Okay, So when you talk about an apprehending object, what is it? Present participle? I think it's called present, right? You say an apprehending. So you use it as an adjective to describe a mind, for instance, an apprehending mind. Or if you use the passive version, then you use the past, apprehended object. Doesn't mean that that object needs to be apprehended in the past. It's just the grammar. So in that case, there's a past participle, I think it's called. Anyway, so it's the past. That's just the grammar. So in this case, you have Sanskrit or Tibetan grammar being based on Sanskrit grammar. So it's just grammar. But the question is still important. Radha's question is still important. What comes first, appearance or perceiving an object? So that's why I'm mentioning this question in so much detail, because I think how she got there is not important, but it's an important question. So we talk about things appearing to us and things being perceived by our mind. They appear and we perceive them. What comes first? Well, first of all, if you have a single mind, for instance, a mind apprehending table, a mind that apprehends a table. So you specify it by way of the way you express it, the way you describe it. Its main object is the table. What appears is the table, and what you apprehend is the table. Does the table appear first to that mind, and then the mind apprehends the table? No. In that case, in the case of that particular mind, it happens simultaneously. The table appears and it's apprehended at the same time. But if we don't specify a mind like that, a mind apprehending table. If we talk in general of many minds, what happens first? Does something appear first, or is it perceived first? Usually, it appears first, I would say, in general. So I'll give you an example. When I look at the table with this eye consciousness perceiving the table, a consciousness or an eye consciousness, more specifically a visual consciousness perceiving a table. So I said early on, the table appears and the table is apprehended. But it's not just the table that appears, more than the table appears. I talked about this before. When you look at the table, those parts of the table that are in the sphere of your vision, not the inside, not the back of the table, they're not in the sphere of your vision. When you look at that table, the atoms of the table appear, right? The atoms, they have to appear. The mind doesn't perceive them. You are not aware of the atoms, right? You perceive just the surface. But all the atoms have to appear, because if they don't appear, those in the sphere of your vision, that would be like saying you look at a screen, a computer screen, and none of the pixels appear, but the screen appears. I mean, without the computer pixels appearing, the screen can't appear. You can't separate them. Now, therefore, the impermanence of the table. No, sorry, I'm jumping a step. So the particles, at least those on the surface, those particles, those atoms, they appear. And how do they appear? As moving. They're moving. They're never the same from one moment to the next. I mean, if you think of subatomic particles, of the movements of electrons and so forth, so they're not static. They're moving. They're non-static, and therefore the impermanence appears to your mind. So to your eye consciousness, impermanence appears before you perceive it, before you realize, independence on a lot of reflection and meditation, that this table that, I don't know, you look at every day, that the impermanence of which appears to you constantly every time you look at it, only later on then you apprehend its impermanence. So that's an example of something fast that appears to us all the time, but we're not aware of it. It appears to our mind, but we're not aware of it. And then later on, we understand it. We can also, the scriptures also talk about, for instance, when we perceive the table, well, before that eye consciousness perceiving the table appears to our sense power. sort of our retina, if you like, if you use the modern scientific terminology. In Buddhist terminology, they don't use words such as retina. They just describe the sense power. But the word that is used is the object appears to that sense power. It appears to the eye. And then later on with the mind, it appears to the mind, to the eye consciousness apprehending that same object. And it appears to that mind and it's apprehended by it. But first, it just appears to, well, the eye sense power in this case. So I would say, although not true for all objects in general, without being specific, like focusing on one particular mind, we could say things, first they appear. I mean, you know, I meet John. I don't know it's John. I don't know who this person is. The person appears to me. And later on, I apprehend this person as being John. So in that case, but if it's just the mind apprehending John, to that mind, John appears simultaneously, is simultaneously the appearing object, or that which John is that which appears and is apprehended. Okay, I hope that answers your question. I think it's important just to understand the mind better. And of course, the better we understand the mind, the better we understand what we study right now. Okay, let's go back then to the material we've been studying so far. So we discussed last time, we discussed the different types of arising from itself. I explained it twice, so no need to go into that again. And arising from something inherently different. We've had there are 4 possibilities. If something were to arise, if hypothetically things were to exist inherently, and if they were to arise inherently, if they existed, if their arising existed objectively from their own side, well, then that arising would either be one of those 4 types of arising. Now, if it were to arise from something different, okay, that would mean, and here the refutation we got to this point here, that would mean that if you have a sunflower and if that was to arise from something different, all these absurdities would arise. So if a cause and effect were inherently different, there would be no dependently or conventionally existent difference between them. So the difference would be, well, not just labeled on the basis of what is different between them. I mean, on one level, they're the same. We can also say they're the same in being impermanent. So we don't label them being different from the point of view of being impermanent. No, we label them being different from the point of view of existing at different times, for instance. But they're the same from the point of view of being impermanent. So you see what I'm getting at? Therefore, a cause and its effect, if they were inherently different, they would be different in all aspects. You couldn't be saying, oh, from the perspective of being impermanent, they're both impermanent, they're the same in being impermanent. You couldn't say that. They'd be different in every way, totally different. And that means there would be no connection between them. They wouldn't be in any way dependent on each other. There would be no connection between them. And that would mean cause and its effect would be totally unrelated, disconnected phenomena. And if an effect could be produced by a cause that was unrelated to it, an effect could arise from anything that is conventionally not considered to be its cause. Anything would be its cause, because an effect would be equally unrelated to its cause and its non-cause. This would mean that a result such as a sunflower would arise not only from a sunflower seed, but from a rice seed, a piece of charcoal, anything, a stone, anything. Any other impermanent phenomenon that precedes it. So that is the main kind of logic that is applied. So therefore, from a Buddhist point of view, since a cause and its effect are mutually dependent, they're merely nominally or conventionally different. Now, something to be mentioned here, and I didn't put it here because, well, it can be explained and it would become too wordy to add this. But, and this is something Lama Tsongkhapa says, how about the view of God? right? The view of God, having the sense that everything has been created by God. It comes up in the next explanation, but actually the view, and this is from a Buddhist point of view, that someone believes everything was created by God, that view is also part of the second view, according to Lama Tsongkhapa. It's not the fourth type. In the commentary on the fundamental wisdom, someone says, well, if you assert that there's a creator God, that would probably be the fourth type of arising causelessly. And in response to that, Lama Tsongkhapa says, no, it would be one of the other types. So it wouldn't be one of the first types. So he doesn't specify which one, but it can't be the first type. Obviously, when something is created by God, it's not created by itself, because God and an object are definitely seen as different. So it could only be, well, the second or the third. Well, actually, it's the second and the third are both included. So, and actually, if we say that, any sense that something that cannot be the cause of something, perceiving that to be the cause of my problem, for instance, is a case of the second type, which is why this becomes interesting to us. I mean, on a personal level, once again, when we hear cause and effect, we may get a sense, oh, this is something I'm not usually concerned with in my daily life. That's far from it. We are obsessed about causes. I mean, every time I have a problem, I look for the cause of my problem, right? So we may not use that vocabulary, substantial cause, and what is the cooperative condition and all that. It doesn't go that far. But cause and effect are very much part of our life. So I have a problem, and I seek a cause. In other words, I seek someone to blame for it, right? Usually, I seek someone, and I'm usually not in all cases. I mean, if there's, I don't know, there's rain, I maybe I blame the government for not doing something about climate change. And if there's rain, excessive rain, okay, but that's a different matter. But what I'm trying to say is, when things go wrong for us, oh, my parents. Yes, it was my parents. Oh, my life is miserable because my parents did this and that. That is actually a case of course, our parents have done things and they have made mistakes, like, no sentient being is perfect. And so therefore, assuming they're not Buddha, so being ordinary beings, therefore, they've made mistakes. But to blame them for everything would be the sense of an unrelated, conventionally, something that is actually conventionally cannot be considered to be the cause, if you really think of it. So in the West, we're so obsessed with that to a certain degree. I mean, I notice it again and again. Getting a sense, if I just have the cause, then my problems are solved. And if I blame my parents, okay, it's changing. I think it was maybe a little more extreme in the past, but still there's that tendency. And that just doesn't make sense, that all my problems come from the way I was raised and so forth. So I don't need to go into this right now. But of course, also blaming something just totally on one person. I'm not talking about our parents, but in other situations. So to really think, to reflect on my own mind, do I have a tendency to put the blame on others? Or myself, in the sense of, like, I'm just such a bad person. I make mistakes and so forth. This is not blaming karma. That's different. Of course, other people are also cooperative conditions of the things that happen to us, but they're not the only cause. I'm not saying that they're not the cooperative condition, that they didn't play a part in it. I'm having a problem with blaming it all onto that person or on these people and so forth. That is not conventionally correct. That doesn't make sense. But also blaming it on me in the sense I'm so stupid and so terrible and everything goes wrong because I'm just an idiot. That's another extreme. Because first of all, it was the actions I accumulated in the past. I'm gone now. I'm not that person any longer. I'm here right now, right? So to see, if, like, in terms of karma, it's most likely that I accumulated those in the past, in a previous life. So right now, I'm may do everything right, at least to the best of my ability, and still stuff happens. That's just how karma works. So to get a sense, yes, there are other people involved. Also, the actions I created in the past, or the me in the previous life, I mean, that person I was in the previous life, and so forth, and to get a much more realistic sense. So in any way in which I have a sense, oh, it's just them, or it's just me, or that's part of the second case of arising. Okay, and to become aware, when is that happening? I mean, that is so miserable. It makes us feel so miserable. That's like usually the outcome of that, because I can't, if I blame another person, if I blame my parents, I can't undo the past, right? If I get stuck with that, I can't undo it, right? And in the end, I mean, like, I blame my parents, I should blame my grandparents, or no, their parents. Oh, no, their parents. Because if I'm the victim of my parents, then their parents are the victim of their parents, and so endless. It's endless. Anyway, I don't even need to get into this, but to become aware that it's many causes and conditions that are responsible for what I experience right now. It's mainly the actions of the past, which are gone now. All I can do is rejoice in when something terrible happens, in the sense that, well, that karma is gone. Great. That effect, the result of that effect, I can no longer experience. And also make an effort possibly to purify whatever lies ahead, right? Okay. And of course, there are other people involved and so forth, and I may have to do something about that. And no one is saying I shouldn't. If they're also involved in that and they're harming me and myself, well, I have a responsibility to do something about it. But what I'm trying to get here is to become aware of our unrealistic sense of causes, of what is the cause, of just focusing. We are masters in simplifying everything that cannot be simplified. It's like that obsession with superfoods, as if there was like one food, and if you ate that, you'd be totally healthy. No, it's always many, many different healthy foods. And likewise, any situation such as my present moment right now, what I undergo, what I experience, is always the result of many different causes and conditions. One of them are my actions in the past, and other people, of course, as well. Okay, so just to get a more realistic sense of that which causes my experiences. And I wanted to mention that as part of the second type of arising. Now, arising from both. Okay, so it's almost like, why would you mention that? You have already arising from itself, and you have already arising from something different. But why? Well, why would you mention both? I mean, you've already refuted them. Well, first of all, there were philosophical systems that accepted both. And also to stress the fact that our mind is so used to holding wrong views that oftentimes we don't just have one wrong view. Well, we can have both wrong views at the same time. I mean, causelessly, that would be pretty contradictory in terms of one particular situation being created by a cause and not being created by a cause. I don't think we would have that sense with regard to one particular object. Of course, we have a sense with regard to some objects, they have no causes, and other objects, they have causes. But I'm not talking about that. So to have all three arising from no cause and from itself and from something different, I don't think with regard to one object that's possible. But you can have the sense that both is possible, that something arises from itself and something different. Okay, so this is shown to us by the theistic Samkhya's and the Jains. Okay, so the theistic Jains, the theistic Samkhya's. So I mentioned the theistic, the non-theistic samkhya's I mentioned before. Usually in the texts, when they describe the third type of arising, usually the Jains are mentioned. The samkhya's not that much. But Lama Tsongkhapa in his commentary mentions the samkhya's. And since it can only be the theistic samkhya's, well, therefore, in the commentaries, in other commentaries on what Lama Tsongkhapa said, theistic samkhya's are therefore mentioned. So I mentioned them here as well. So who are these theistic samkhya's? Well, like the non-theistic samkhya's, they maintain that a result such as a sunflower arises from a cause that is of the same nature as itself. Additionally, they hold that the sunflower is created by the god Ishvara. So there's the sense that this primal substance that is of the same nature as the seed of the sunflower and the sunflower, so that the sunflower and its seed are of the same nature, and thus the sunflower has to exist at the time of the seed. So they have that view, but they also incorporate the idea of a creator god. So they're different Samkhya schools. And the problem is really to now depict God. I don't know how to depict God. It's the hand of Shiva, I think. Ishvara is sometimes, some Samkhya, some followers of the Samkhyas, I've read, they followed Shiva. But not all of them. Not all of them, not all of those. They in the scriptures they talk about Ishvara. So Ishvara, but Ishvara, for some it wasn't Shiva. For some it was more, I don't know, a being, like an all-encompassing being and so forth. So I didn't know how to depict, and in the end I chose this illustration with the name Ishvara. So anyway, it shouldn't be blue. I had like the hand of God coming out of a cloud, but that was kind of ridiculous. And the thunder, no, the lightning bolt, that was too Greek. Anyway, so I chose this one here. Okay, so theistic Samkhya school, according to the theistic Samkhyas, the sunflower rises from itself because it arises from a cause that is of the same nature as itself, and they hold that it rises from something different, something disconnected, with respect to being created by the god Ishvara. And this is also, from a Buddhist point of view, if we assert that, for instance, I don't know, the harvest in a field was created by the seeds that were sown by the farmer and by God, that would be a case of the third type. And of course, this is only saying this to Buddhists. It's not about refuting Christians or Muslims and so forth. I mean, their beliefs are important. They're important to them, and they should maintain them as long as it allows them to be an ethical and so forth person. All that is really important. This is just for Buddhists. So to say, well, from a Buddhist point of view, that is an extreme view for two reasons. In this case, arising from itself and being created by God. And then you've got the Jains, Chirpuwa, well, like the Samkhyas, you still find followers of the Jains nowadays, also in India. They assert that a sentient being arises from itself because it is caused by the living being from the previous life that is part of the same continuum. So they would say, I'm created by myself because I'm part of the same continuum. And the living being of the present life also arises from something different because it is the result of its karma, its parents, and so on. So I'm different from my karma, right? So my karma and then my parents as a cooperative condition that is responsible for the ripening of certain karmas and so forth. So this I didn't want to illustrate. I thought the second assertion is easier to illustrate. So similarly, a clay pot arises from itself because it's the result of the clay. So they don't use the language, I'm not sure they use this language of substantial cause and so forth. I'm not sure. So I left it, but it's really saying that it's that same continuum that is now transformed. You've got the clay that's being formed, and then eventually burnt and so forth. So therefore, it arises from itself, and it also arises from something different, from a potter and the pottery wheel and so forth. Okay, so that is the Jain's view. And again, how is this in any way? Does that speak to me? If I have a sense that a clay arises from a vase arises from itself because it arises from a former continuum. So let's say that whole piece of clay has now been transformed. Of course, you add some water to it, but you haven't wasted anything of that huge chunk of clay, and you've used it all to make this vase. Nothing got wasted. So in that case, this is really the continuum of that. That is similar to me as a 5-year-old one and to me right now. Okay, I look very different as a 5-year-old. I look very different, just as this chunk of clay looked very different to the pot, to the vase or the pot. But nonetheless, it's the same continuum. Now, do we have a sense that a former continuum is the same? The continuum of something, the previous continuum of something is the same as what we have right now. Do you have a sense? Do we get a sense? Oh yeah, all the time. Our sense of permanence. Our sense of permanence is a sense that the me for the person that I am right now is the same as the person 2 days ago. Even just saying, and I usually, the ones who've heard me say this before, I usually say the same thing again and again. Usually I don't come up with much new stuff. So the person who entered this room and the person talking to you right now, they're the same, right? We all have that same sense. I'm not talking about your Buddhist mind. If I asked you, switch on your Buddhist mind, is the person who came into the room you're in right now and the person who's now listening to what I'm saying, is that the same person with your Buddhist mind? You would say no, they've changed, they're impermanent. But don't use your Buddhist mind. Use your everyday kind of mind. The everyday kind of mind has a sense that the same. And that is reflected in many of our reactions, right? A sense of hurt, for instance. If someone hurt me yesterday, I still feel hurting. I'm still, this me right now, I'm the one who was hurt. Actually, I'm no longer the same person. And I'm not feeling hurt right now because I'm thinking, it's the same continuum. It's not that sense. It's a sense I'm the victim. I'm exactly that person. I mean, I'm exactly that person that was harmed. And the sense that all the harm I experienced in the past is still with me because I'm that same person. So we're sometimes hurting so much because there's a sense that hurt is still with us because it's me. A sense I'm still that hurt child. So actually the hurt is gone. We just can't let it go. In that the feeling, okay, so memories may arise, but we don't realize they're just memories. They're just minds that come and go. We feel that's the hurt, and that is me, that hurt child. No, we've gone. That person is gone. So it kind of contributes to our sense of not being able to let go of the hurt we experienced in the past. And oftentimes we try to push it away, and then we never resolve it really and carry this with us. So I guess one part is one solution. There are, of course, many other. I mean, modern psychology has many great techniques to deal with it, but definitely this idea that I'm changing constantly, and what has happened to me in the past is gone. The past is no longer there. I'm a different person, although not totally different. I mean, I still have similar ideas and similar, but it's similar, not the same, not identical. That is one aspect, dealing with our own personal problems, but also with other people. So one thing is holding a grudge, holding on to our aversion, our resentment with regard to another person because of what they've done to us in the past. Okay, so many of you have heard me say that many times. Someone has hurt me last week. I'm still holding this grudge in that when I meet this person, so let it be John. I hope there's no one there called John. So anyway, John did something to me that's deeply hurt me last week. And today I meet John again, and I'm thinking, that's the guy who hurt me. That's that jerk who's done this, that, and the other. So a sense that that this is still the same guy, that John from last week and John right now, they're one, they're identical. In that way, John can only be permanent. If John yesterday and John now is identical. So there is a sense that the John now, okay, has arisen from John last week, but it's really the same person. So it hasn't really arisen, but yeah, well, you would still say it has arisen from John last week, but it's arising from itself. So really, John existed then. The present John must have existed in the last week, or the other way around. Last week's John must exist now. But usually when we hold a grudge, we have a sense, last week's John, that's him. That's him right here. And I resent him right here and right now. Yeah. So what I'm saying is, don't put on your Buddhist cap when you analyze that, in the sense of like, yeah, but it's the same continuum, he's harmed me, it's the same continuum. That's not how it feels when we have resentment towards John. So be honest to yourself in that moment. That moment of resentment doesn't reflect on the impermanence of John. No, it has a sense that's the same person. And a lot of resentment and a lot of aversion towards another person that comes from holding a grudge, the way I just described, is based on that misperception. So we're really like the Jains, except we're not even aware of it, right? At least they've spelled it out, helping us to recognize, oh, we have the same view. We have the same view. I have the same view that my trouble has arisen from John, and that's the John right now, for instance. Okay. Anyway, why am I mentioning that? It's not usually important to understand in the sense of the philosophical ideas, but how is this relevant to us? How are we creating unnecessary suffering? And I'm not talking about inherent existence and all that. That, of course, is the absolute root. But we have other wrong views, and they create so many problems for us and for the people around us. So the first step, of course, to make changes is to recognize, in this case, our own wrong views. Of course, other people suffer from their own wrong views, but we can't do much about them, except for explaining them. But we're the only person we can really change. It's only our own mind that we can change. So first step is to become aware. Okay, so that's the Jain school. Going back to the explanation, we've got that clay, piece of clay here. And then you've got the potter and the pottery wheel. So the Jains assert that this arises, the pot arises from itself because it arises from the clay, and it arises from other conditions such as the potter, the potter and the pottery wheel and so forth. So therefore, it arises also from something totally separate, something inherently separate. Okay. And so arising from both, how do you refute it? Well, take both logical consequences, the absurdities that were mentioned early on. Well, each one of them asserts, they get rid of this wrong view. So no need to mention them again. And then the last type is the arising without a cause. Okay. So, of course, we are lucky there's a Buddhist school, non-Buddhist Indian school called nihilists. They're called the nihilistic school of the Charvakas. Sometimes they're described as hedonists, because of their assertions. They advertised a kind of hedonistic lifestyle based on the idea that, for instance, our actions have no causes. Our experiences have no causes. There's no law of cause and effect. You can just do whatever you like. Just enjoy. Our consequences won't have any, our actions won't have any consequences, just as our experiences, they just happen. So if you hear that kind of assertion, I guess we can also recognize ourselves in that view. So we've got a little bit of all of them. There are plenty of situations where we think, oh, if no one sees me doing this, I'll be all right. My actions won't have consequences. I mean, in particular, with regard to first of all, with regard to the experiences we have right now, a sense of that is so unfair that it happens to me and no one else. So a sense like there's no cause. It's just a coincidence that I suffer and someone else doesn't. How unfair is that? Not having the sense that what I experience is the result of a karmic action I accumulated in the past, and the other person has very likely also accumulated some similar action, but it just doesn't ripen in that moment, right? Because that's the thing about karma. It ripens due to other causes and conditions, and if they're present in a particular moment, then they may ripen. For me in this case, they're not present for the other person. They don't ripen. So don't ask me why. That's why karma is so subtle. That is too subtle. I mean, think of like two seeds you plant in the ground. From one, you have a sunflower, and from the other, nothing ever grows. Why? I don't know. What's wrong with that one seed? I don't know. Maybe not the right causes and conditions came together for that specific seed. And then a year later, it suddenly sprouts. I don't know why. So it's too complicated. Cause and effect on a subtler level, and cause and effect, the law of cause and effect includes the law of karma. On a certain level, it becomes too subtle to really understand. But a sense that, oh, this happens to me and no one else, and that is just unfair. There's a sense there's no cause, or the cause is unrelated, maybe, or there's no cause at all. Or the sense that when I engage in an action, if no one sees me, I'll be all right. There won't be any consequences. If I can just cheat the other person without them seeing it, I'll have a benefit, there won't be any consequence in the form of karma. So those are examples of holding the views of the Charvakas. Okay, time is up, so we came to the end, almost to the end. Start to do a meditation in a moment, but just let me quickly summarize what I talked about today. I talked about the letter to the last two types of arising from, I started with going through the refutation of the second type of arising from something different or something inherently different. Why does that not make sense? And then I explained also the third type, the arising or the extreme view of asserting that something arises both from itself and from something different. And I also mentioned now the last type, arising without a cause. Having explained those, and they're, I guess, hopefully clearly enough explained in the handout, well, what I asked you to do was to not see this in an unrelated way outside of yourself, but also to use this as a way to reflect on your own sense of cause and effect. Are there times, and it changes all the time, our wrong views, in Tibetan there's the saying, wrong views have no limits. One moment you hold this view, that it arises from itself, that, like I said, I'm the same as as who I was yesterday, for instance. So the sense, therefore, that is something has arisen from itself, or that this person has harmed me. The person who's harmed me, that's the same guy now who's harmed me. So since again, this harm comes from that person and that person, therefore, it has arisen from itself in the sense that this person is the result of who he was early on, but he's at the same time also the same. Okay, so anyway, you can go through it yourself, but the point is, therefore, we hold all these wrong views in our daily life, and it happens all the time because we usually, when some situation arises, especially when it's a problem, we look for a cause. What was the cause of it? That's a good tendency we have, but unfortunately, oftentimes our assertions as for the cause, they're not realistic. And that is one of the first steps to make changes, to become aware of them. So, am I asserting something arises from itself? Am I asserting something arises from something different? Am I asserting something arises from both? Or do I have a sense it doesn't have a cause and therefore doesn't have an effect either? Okay. All right, so plenty of material to reflect on. So let's do the meditation now. Just a sec. All right, and we start as usual with some breathing meditation. So if you feel tired and overwhelmed from that talking, just let it go and simply focus on the breath. Now, focus your attention on your own mind, on your own tendencies. When it comes to what causes your experiences. What causes the situations you find yourself in. Especially the unpleasant ones. Let's say you experience a situation because you made a mistake last month. Although that situation you experience is not necessarily the karmic result of your mistake, a month ago, but it was caused by it. You find yourself blaming your present I getting angry with yourself based on the sense that you are exactly that person who made the mistake a month ago. As if the person from a month ago and the present I were identical. Well, then that's a case of you holding the extreme view of something having arisen from itself. And how about situations when you may blame everything on maybe your parents, give them fault, blame them for your problems, difficulties. We make someone else responsible. Maybe a colleague, a neighbor, a sibling. Give them the blame for some resultant experience. Maybe blame the government. Not in the sense that they have responsibility, but a sense that they are the only cause of that problem. Well, that's an example of holding the extreme view of something having arisen from something different. And then how about situations when you feel there's no cause? That it just is. Without her being created by anything. Can you think of situations when that was the case? Or a sense that whatever I do right now won't have a result. Well, in that case, we also hold on to the fourth type of extreme. Sense that things arise, at least some things arise without a cause. So therefore, without even addressing the subtlest type of misperception, perception of objective existence, even on a coarser level, afflicted by different, sometimes contradictory, wrong views. Which lead to different misperceptions and thereby to different problems and difficulties. And oftentimes, they happen so automatically due to our familiarity with them. That we're not even aware when they arise. Which is why the first step is to be more mindful of these misperceptions or extreme views. So to conclude your analysis, Now focus the single-pointed mind on your insight, on whatever conclusion you've reached, so that it moves you in such a way that your analysis has an influence on your daily life. And then finally, let's dedicate all the positive potential we've accumulated, especially today, listening, reflecting, and meditating on fundamental wisdom. May this become a cause for us to quickly actualize our fullest potential, so that we can become an object of refuge for all sentient beings, and be able to guide them to the enlightenment of a Buddha. And may our positive potential also become a cause for our wonderful lamas, His Holiness the Dalai Lama, and all the other great lamas, great masters, to have a long and healthy life, so that they continue to guide us through their example and through their teachings. And let's dedicate also positive potential towards all sentient beings around us, in particular those who are affected by natural calamities such as earthquakes, fires, droughts, floods, and so forth. May they soon find relief from their worries, their sufferings. And as always, let's dedicate towards those who are sick, like Geshe, Tali Lubin, and everyone else. May they all soon recover. And find mental and physical happiness, lasting happiness. So with this in mind, let's do the dedication prayers. Through the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. In the land encircled by snow mountains, you are the source of all happiness and good. All-powerful Chinrezig, Denzin Gyatso, please remain until samsara ends. May the precious Bodhi mind not yet born arise and grow. May that born have no decline, but increase forevermore. Okay, thank you very much, and have a great week. I'll see you again next
Thank
Monday.
you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.